The scent of damp earth clawed at her nostrils. A suffocating blanket pressed against eyes she couldn't open. Darkness. Absolute, heavy, crushing darkness. A dull ache throbbed through her body. A cruel echo of the fire that had consumed her lower half hours, maybe days ago. Childbirth. The memory surfaced like a splintered shard, the tearing pain, the impossible joy, the monstrous accusation. Twins, they'd spat, the word like poison on their tongues. Curse and abomination. And then the shovels. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through the haze of pain and exhaustion. She couldn't move. Earth packed tight against her, above her, around her. This wasn't the birthing room, crude and hurried as it had been. This was the grave. They'd buried her alive. Buried her because she had brought two tiny, perfect girls into a world that feared what it didn't understand. The world of this isolated, God-fearing, cruelty-harboring valley. Fear became terror when she heard it. A faint, muffled sound, impossibly close. Tiny, struggling cry. And then another. Her babies. They were here, buried with her. A primal scream tore through her mind, silent and trapped behind lips caked with soil. They were alive. The fragile, gasping cries of her newborns fueled a raw, ferocious energy she hadn't known she possessed. The crushing weight above was no longer just death. It was a threat to them. She shifted, a minuscule movement that sent waves of agony through her battered body. The earth resisted, solid, unyielding. Her fingers scrabbled uselessly against the packed dirt beside her face. There was no air. The small pocket around her head was thin, already tasting of dust and desperation. Tears tracked muddy paths down her temples, disappearing into the soil. Elias, her husband, where was he? Locked away, accused of crimes he didn't commit, silenced, removed. His strong hands, his quiet strength, his unwavering belief in her all gone when she needed them most. If he knew, if he could see them now, buried beneath this unforgiving ground, but he couldn't. He was miles away, behind stone and bars, as helpless as she was meant to be. They had planned it, removed him, then dealt with her curse. The baby's cries grew weaker, tiny whimpers swallowed by the soil. No, not like this. Not after fighting for them, after the agony of bringing them forth. She wouldn't let this be their end. She wouldn't let this be her end. Not when they depended on her. The air was growing stale, thick with the smell of earth and the metallic tang of fear. Every breath was a struggle. Her muscles screamed, protesting against the confinement, the lack of leverage. How deep had they dug? Not deep enough to kill her instantly, deep enough to ensure she suffocated, deep enough to silence the curse permanently. They hadn't even wrapped her properly, just shoved her, bleeding and exhausted, into the hole. The rough fabric of her simple dress scraped against the soil. Anger, cold and steady, began to replace the panic. Anger at the judgment, at the fear, at the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of the people she had lived amongst. They had watched her belly swell, whispered behind cupped hands, eyes filled with suspicion. And when the twins came, a double blessing twisted into a double damnation, they had acted swiftly, brutally. This wasn't justice. This wasn't God's will. This was murder. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to move again, a fraction of an inch at a time, testing the earth, feeling for any give. Her arm, pinned awkwardly beneath her, was numb. She tried to shift it, crying out softly against the suffocating gag of dirt. A tiny hand brushed her cheek. One of the babies, miraculously close. A surge of fierce love, hot and protective, flooded her. They were counting on her. Elias was counting on her, though he didn't know it yet. She had to live. They had to live. The tiny cries were fading now, becoming soft, shallow whimpers that tore at Sarah's soul. They needed air. Desperate, she angled her head, pressing her mouth against the soil directly above her face, trying to create a small space, to find a pocket, anything. She couldn't see, couldn't move her body properly, but her hands, tangled with the soft, warm weight of her babies, began to claw weakly at the dirt around her head. Each scrape sent a fresh wave of pain through her muscles screaming from the recent ordeal of birth and the present horror. The babies stirred, their tiny forms shifting against her, seeking warmth, seeking life. Their utter helplessness was a spur, a constant, agonizing reminder of the race against time she was losing. She thought of Elias, his face, etched with the quiet worry he always tried to hide, the strength in his calloused hands, hands that could mend fences, gentle a wild horse, or hold her tenderly. Where was he now? Was he still locked away, counting the days, oblivious? Or had some flicker of instinct, some bond deeper than steel and stone, alerted him? She prayed, a desperate, silent prayer for him, for her babies, for air, for a miracle. The earth above felt heavy, packed solid. They hadn't just covered her. They had tamped the soil down, deliberate, cruel. Hours blurred into a timeless eternity of darkness and struggle. The babies were mostly silent now, their exhaustion a terrifying stillness against her body. Only the faintest, shallow breaths, a tiny flutter against her skin, told her they still clung to life. Sarah herself was fading, her own breathing ragged and shallow. Her head pounded, her limbs felt heavy and unresponsive. But the thought of the tiny lives nestled against her, depending on her, kept the spark of will alive. She wouldn't surrender. Not yet. Above ground, miles away, Elias moved with a brutal, relentless purpose. The crude prison was a memory, a quickly overcome obstacle. News had reached him, distorted, fragmented, carried on the wind of rumor, something about Sarah, about a curse, about her disappearance. He hadn't needed details. A cold dread had settled in his gut the moment the words reached him. He knew the valley, knew the fear and suspicion that festered there. He knew they wouldn't tolerate anything different. And Sarah, his Sarah, was fiercely, beautifully different. He pushed his body to its limits, riding hard, the landscape blurring past in a desperate race against an unknown horror. His face was set, grim, his eyes hard. He didn't stop for rest, barely for water. Every pounding hoofbeat, every aching muscle, drove him faster. He had to reach her. He had to. As Elias rode, spurred by a dark premonition, Sarah felt a shift in the air around her, a subtle change in the pressure. Had she managed to create a tiny space? Or was it just her mind playing tricks? She focused all her remaining energy, pushing feebly upwards with her head, trying to lift the weight, even just a fraction. The babies lay still, small burdens against her, their silence more terrifying than their cries. She whispered their names, softly, hoping they could hear her, feel her presence. A flicker of warmth, a tiny movement against her hand. One of them was still fighting. She had to fight too. The darkness was absolute, but Sarah's mind conjured images. Elias's face, etched with determination. The small, rough cabin they had built together. The feel of sunlight on her skin. These memories were anchors, tethering her to life, to hope, however faint. Then, a new sensation. Faint vibration. Intermittent, rhythmic, like something heavy moving above. Was it them? Coming back to ensure she was dead? Or was it? Elias reined in his exhausted horse, the animal lathered and blowing. He was here, the small, isolated rise overlooking the valley, where Sarah had gone into labor at a hastily constructed shelter. Nothing looked disturbed, but his gut screamed otherwise. The air felt wrong, too quiet. He dismounted, his legs stiff, scanning the ground. His eyes, trained to read the subtle signs of the land, found it. A patch of earth, freshly disturbed, clumsily covered over. It was here. A choked sound escaped his throat. They had done this, buried her. His knees hit the ground, ignoring the pain. He didn't call her name, didn't make a sound that could alert anyone. He just began to dig. He used his hands, tearing at the soil like a frantic animal, ignoring the pain as stones and roots tore his flesh. The shovel was tied to his saddle, but he couldn't spare the seconds to retrieve it. His mind was a white-hot focus. Get to her. He dug deeper, faster, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The earth was soft here, recently turned, but still resistant. He pulled out clods of soil, threw them aside, sweat blinding his eyes. Fear, cold and absolute, mingled with a burning rage. If they had harmed her, if they had harmed his children. Beneath the ground, Sarah felt the vibrations intensify. A frantic, scraping sound directly above her head. It wasn't the slow, deliberate movement of covering a grave. It was rapid, urgent, desperate. Hope, sharp and almost unbearable, pierced through her despair. Couldn't be. It was impossible. Yet the sound persisted, growing louder, closer. Dirt shifted above her, a trickle falling onto her face. Then more. Large chunks. The darkness was beginning to fracture. A sliver of gray light appeared above her, widening rapidly. A face materialized, silhouetted against the pale sky, grim, dirt-streaked, eyes wild with desperation. Elias. He dropped into the hole, his hands reaching, pulling at the remaining earth. Sarah. His voice was a raw, choked cry. He found her, tangled in the dirt, her face pale, her eyes wide and filled with an impossible mix of agony and relief. And then he saw the shapes beneath her dress, heard the faintest sounds. He understood. Twins, buried alive. The rage in his eyes was terrifying, but his hands were gentle as he cleared the last of the dirt. The babies? He rasped, his voice thick with emotion. Here, she whispered, her voice cracked and weak. She shifted, cradling the tiny forms against her. Elias reached down, his big hands incredibly careful, lifting them from the grave one by one. 2 impossibly small bundles, still and quiet. He checked, frantically, for breath. A shallow sigh from one, a tiny whimper from the other. Alive. They were alive. He looked back at Sarah, still half-buried, tears carving clean streaks through the dirt on his face. We need to get you out. He worked quickly, pulling her free from the clinging soil, his strength boundless despite his exhaustion. She collapsed against him, weak and trembling. The babies clutched to her chest. He held them all, 3 lives pulled from the jaws of the earth. The silence of the desolate hillside was broken only by their ragged breathing and the faint cries of the newborns, now exposed to the air. He didn't ask who had done this, didn't need to. The valley people, their fear, their cruelty. He had always been an outsider, a man who didn't fit their narrow world. And Sarah, his wife, had paid the price for loving him, and for bringing life they deemed unworthy. They sat there for a moment, huddled together in the raw earth, a family reborn from the grave. The cold seeped into their bones, but the warmth of their shared survival was stronger. Sarah looked at Elias, her silent, stoic husband, the man they had tried to break, who had broken free for them. In his eyes, she saw not just love and relief, but a hardened resolve. They couldn't stay. Not here. Not in this valley that had tried to murder them. Elias helped Sarah to her feet, carefully supporting her as she swayed. The babies were wrapped in his discarded prison coat, small, precious burdens. He retrieved his horse, the shovel, the meager supplies he carried. There were no words needed, no lengthy explanations. They understood each other completely. The valley lay below them, peaceful and picturesque in the fading light, a stark contrast to the horror it concealed. They turned their backs on it, on the fear and hatred, and walked towards the setting sun. Elias carrying the babies, Sarah leaning on his arm, weak but unbroken. They were wounded, scarred, and utterly alone in the vast, indifferent landscape, but they were together. Resilience wasn't just survival. It was the refusal to let cruelty extinguish the light of love and hope. They had faced the deepest darkness, the ultimate betrayal, and emerged, not unscathed, but alive. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger, but they would face it together. A silent promise passed between them, stronger than any vow spoken aloud. They had buried her and their children, but they hadn't buried their spirit. And in the heart of the wild, unforgiving land, a family forged in the grave began their journey towards a new life, carrying the weight of their past, but powered by an indomitable will to survive and the fierce, quiet love that had defied death itself. The world had tried to cast them out, but they had been pulled back from the earth, stronger, more determined, a testament to the enduring power of connection in the face of profound darkness.